President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, now indicted on not one but three federal gun charges. This is after that plea deal fell apart in the summer. Hunter's accused about lying about his drug use when purchasing a firearm back in 2018, a time when he admitted he was struggling with addiction to crack cocaine. This is all according to the indictment.
Guy Relford is a Second Amendment attorney, and Cam Edwards is an editor and bearing arms and Second Amendment advocate. Guy, I want to start with you on what stands out to you on these charges, two of which were for false statements under the law and one law banning firearm possession by a drug user.
Well, exactly. Counts 1 and counts 2 of the indictment are largely redundant in the sense they're both based on the fact that Hunter allegedly lied on the form you filled out called a 4473 when you're buying a gun in a gun store. There's a specific question. So are you a user of or addicted to any illegal drugs? When he checked no, again, under the terms of the indictment, and knowing that, in fact, that was false, that's a couple of different crimes as set forth in counts 1 and counts 2. One is knowingly making a statement to deceive that firearm dealer in order to obtain your gun. Another is when you certify that form, and that form's required to be kept as a record by the dealer, that's a separate crime. So that's 10 years on count 1, 5 years on count 2. And then count 3 is after he allegedly made that misstatement, that false statement on the 4473, he then walked out of the gun store with the gun. And he's a prohibited possessor under a separate section of federal code, meaning he cannot possess a gun if he's a user of or addicted to illegal drugs. So by simply possessing the gun, there's another 10 years potentially in federal prison. So those are the three counts of the indictment.
Now, the attorneys, Cam, or the attorney, Abby Lowell, who's representing Hunter Biden here, Cam, through this process, argues that some of this is unconstitutional. What exactly, Cam, I know that this is your forte, if you will. The Second Amendment, what does this say? How does this play into these charges? And do you believe there is a legal argument for some of these charges to be unconstitutional, as his attorney has placed it?
Yeah, I absolutely do. There's a case out of the Fifth Circuit right now called U.S. versus Daniels involving a individual who was pulled over, had a gun and a small amount of marijuana in his car. He was charged with, again, being an unlawful user of drugs and possession of a firearm, one of the same counts that Hunter Biden is facing. The Fifth Circuit, three-judge panel, ruled last month that this law is unconstitutional, that the historical record shows that you could be barred from possessing a firearm while you're intoxicated, but that there are no sort of historical analogs, either at the time of the founding or the ratification of the 14th Amendment, that would ban the possession of firearms from all those who, use intoxicants, right? Whether that's alcohol or whether that's drugs. So I think this is an argument that Biden's attorneys are right to make. We'll see what happens with the Daniels case. The Supreme Court could decide to take that before Biden goes to trial, but I'm guessing that they're still holding out for a plea bargain here.
Hunter's lawyers spoke about those charges last night.
If you think about it, what has changed? They knew all the facts for years. The law, if it has changed at all, as you pointed out, there have been at least 2 federal courts that have found this law in particular to be unconstitutional. And therefore, you have to ask what changed. And what changed, you also just talked about. It is the folks like Chairman Comer and the Republican MAGA crazies who have been pressuring this U.S. attorney to do something to vindicate their political position. And guess what? They succeeded.
All right. So if he is found guilty of these charges, could he face any prison time?
Well, certainly. Under the federal sentencing guidelines, the judge has a lot of latitude. There's essentially a point system, and you get positive points in your favor, for instance, if you don't have much of a criminal history or if there's very few firearms involved for these particular violations. There are points against you if you don't cooperate with the investigation, if you don't accept accountability, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on your criminal history, that could count for or against you. So there's a point system, and based on those points, there's essentially an assumed sentence range. But the potential here, if he were to be sentenced to consecutive sentences and convicted under all 3 counts, is 25 years. Most judges, especially for people who are facing these kinds of charges for the first time, aren't going to necessarily sentence anyone consecutively. But he could definitely still look at some potential jail time, depending on how that point system works out under the federal sentencing guidelines, and how the judge feels about this case.
Yeah, Professor Dershowitz was on earlier. He believes he'll get some sort of probation. Cam, I wanted to point back to Abbe Lowell. We just played a clip representing Hunter Biden. He talked about what we talked about earlier, but the potential unconstitutional argument, or that the evidence there hasn't changed. But he also talked about the pressure from the, quote, MAGA crazies who have been pressuring this U.S. attorney to vindicate their political position. And guess what? They succeeded in this moment here. Cam, your response to that argument there by Lowell and putting this on, quote, MAGA crazies.
Yeah, listen, I think the reason why these charges came about is because the judge in this case found real problems with the original plea deal. I think most conservatives would rather see Hunter Biden's financial improprieties investigated, right? This is not something that, a lot of conservatives are really hanging their hat on. I don't care one way or the other about these particular charges, and I'd be happy to see the underlying statute thrown out, quite honestly. So to try to blame this as a political distraction, I think ignores the allegations against Hunter Biden, not just with the gun charges, but again, some of the other things that he's been accused of doing. I suppose it's the great defense to make in public, but I don't think it's going to play well in court. And frankly, I don't think it's going to play well in the court of public opinion either.
All right. Excellent points by both Guy Relford, Cam Edwards. Thank you, gentlemen. Enjoy the weekend.